Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, researchers are questioning the fundamental technology behind SSL. We'll share the details with you. And Microsoft was caught storing customers' passwords in clear text. Plus, we've got a war story that takes place the first day on the job, and it's a rough one that you'll never forget. All that and more in this week's episode of TechSNAP. And welcome to TechSNAP, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. This is episode 45, and we stream this one live on February 16th. The live stream is powered by ScaleEngine.com, which is awesome. And the episode is sponsored by two fine companies this week, GOG.com, and if you buy 2 or more games in the month of February, you'll save 10%, and GoDaddy.com. Use our code TechSNAP10 and save 10% at checkout. I'll tell you more about both of those companies as the show goes on, because honestly, it's all about us. My name is Chris, and joining us is our host, like every single week, the tech, the admin, and the teacher, Alan Jute. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for coming out.
Yeah, episode 45, man. It's kind of like,
yeah,
it's like, wow, it's kind of blown my mind. And just before the show started, I said, was there anything at the beginning of the podcasting process that you now reflecting back on either find surprising or didn't expect or anything like that? And you said,
well, it's like when we originally came up with the idea, the show was going to be quite a bit different.
It's true, yeah.
Right? And it was going to be kind of news, and then there was a lot of stuff about robots, and it was a bit more political. And then
it's true.
It kind of really started taking on a security focus when we, a couple of big security stories come up a couple of weeks in a row.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden,
when the show really got rolling too is when when Stuxnet broke and the PSN network hack thing was really kicking off.
Yeah. And those are like and Dropbox.
Yeah. Well, in both our backgrounds, as we kind of realized as the show went, made us, we both have a pretty big background in security in this stuff. So there's a lot we can draw from there. Hey, we don't usually pick an app at the top of the show, but I have, I came by this, and I gotta say, you guys, the guys over at the TechSNAP subreddit at links.techsnap.tv, if you like this show and you want even more of this show, well, there's a ton of stories that sometimes that we don't even have time to fit them into the show, and you can still find them over at the TechSNAP subreddit at links.techsnap.tv. And thanks to everybody who submits stories, but we need more people voting too, so go over there and vote. One of the stories that I came across this week from the subreddit was VLC 2.0 release candidate, and I know that both you and I are big VLC player fans. And VLC is supposedly going to introduce a streaming feature that I know you've been kind of looking forward to, right?
Yes. So VLC 2.0 will introduce support for HLS, or HTTP live streaming, which is the basically an HTML5 way to do video streaming. So that will probably shortly replace the regular RTSP link you see for VLC on our live streaming page, and it will solve the audio video out of sync. It'll solve the stuttering, and it's very smooth, and it's a much better alternative to RTSP to replace Flash.
Yeah. This is because it's simply just way more modern, right?
Yeah. RTSP was really designed to be used for multicast, which only works inside a LAN, and it does audio and video separate streams, and it was basically designed to work inside a LAN. And so it doesn't work great on the internet.
No, we're lucky, and thanks actually to VLC's buffering capabilities, you can make it semi-usable, but it's still just a little it's just not what it's designed to do. So I'm looking forward to 2.0 of VLC. I'm going to check out the release candidate soon. I think it's going to be good.
So I've been very happy. I've been playing with the daily builds just to see how the HLS streaming works, although there seems to be a bug specifically with the way our media server writes the playlist, but there's a way around it, so it's not a big deal.
Oh man, there's always something. All right, well, we've got a big show, lots of interesting news. In fact, our first news story is pretty amazing. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about our first sponsor this week, because boy, am I elated to have these guys on. These people I'm huge fans of, because you guys probably know me. I'm a huge retro gamer, and that's GOG.com. They've got some of the best classic games on the internet, and I love this company. Not only am I a longtime customer of theirs, I've bought all kinds of games from them, but I also like the way they treat their customers. DRM-free content with extra bonuses added on almost every download, great fair prices. I'll have a couple of picks, but you might be familiar with GOG.com, but one thing you might not know about GOG is they have a a community aspect I think they call mixes. So I'll give you an example. Say we go over to Deus Ex, which is just an awesome video game, right? And if you scroll down, you'll find that they have mixed categories down here of other games that this has been included on. And these are kind of like almost like playlists, but for video games, right? And so like great CRPGs and games with great writing. So if you want games with great story, this is a really great way where you can get community-based filtered stuff. And look what we're talking about for the prices here. You can get Gabriel Knight Sins of the Fathers for $5.99. I mean, that's just amazing pricing. But I got 2 picks for you guys because I love these games and I know what's great. Let me tell you about my first pick, and that's Wing Commander 3. Now, I think a lot of you probably are familiar with Wing Commander 3. It's an action sci-fi game, and it stars Mark Hamill, and it also stars, I can't remember his name, but if you're a Star Trek geek, you'll know who I'm talking about. He's the bad guy, Soren from Star Trek Generations, and he's also, did Fantasy Island and things like that. This is one of those games where it was actually, I think, a little held back by the technology at the time. CD-ROMs just weren't that fast. But now that you can get this digital download, DRM free, and just run it off of your fast hard drive, oh man, this game, it flies. It is a great old game. And another game that is just universally loved around the world. So I'm going to give you 2 picks because remember, GOG.com is giving you 10% off if you buy 2 games in the month of February. So my second pick, so that way you can get a great deal, is Syndicate. $5.99. You get the manual, you get avatars. This is a game that's probably been on nearly every top game list ever. It's about sort of a dystopian future where almost everything becomes a commodity, and you can game the system to get on top of it. It's got some dark elements to it, but it also has a lot of great writing, very immersive storyline, and a really fun soundtrack. So that's Syndicate. That's $5.99 over at GOG.com. And Wing Commander 3, which is a must, or Wing Commander 3, which is a must play, is also $5.99. You can pick up both those titles, and you'll just get 10% off because it's the month of February.
And if you looked at buying a new game, they're usually $59.99. So
right. Well, and the thing about these games is some of these are like the inspiration for what we have now, and sometimes the original was better.
And a lot of times, because the graphics and so on weren't as good, and they were hamstrung by that, they had to have better stories. Yeah, that was the only way to get you to play and to get immersed in the story.
Well, and it's also
fun. They couldn't do it with shiny pictures.
It's also fun to see an older and wiser Luke Skywalker playing another space role. And it also has some great space sim combat in it too. It's a little raily. A little bit on rails, but it's, you have all these great cutscenes with Mark Hamill, and then you go out and blow stuff up in your cockpit. And it's just great space combat. So you got to check that out. I'll put links in the show notes. And also, if you'd like, hit GOG up on Twitter. They are GOG.com on Twitter, and say thank you very much, guys, for supporting Jupiter Broadcasting, because I know that you guys love those guys, and they're the exact kind of company you want, fueling our type of independent media production. And it's thanks to them that we're able to do this, and it's thanks to them that I'm able to do these kinds of things full time. So go over there and say thanks to GOG.com on Twitter for supporting Jupiter Broadcasting. All right, Alan, we have a lot of news to get into today. I have some big stories that have like long-reaching ramifications. Do you want to take it with this number one story? I love the headline too. It's 99.8% of security for real-world public keys is secure.
Yeah. So basically, 99.8% of the world's public key infrastructure uses securely generated random numbers, leaving another 0.2% that doesn't. So the public, to understand some of the concepts here, I'm going to have to go into the background a little bit, and I apologize that this is over everybody's head, but I've tried to keep it fairly simple. So PKI, or the public key infrastructure, is basically a type of encryption system known as asymmetric cryptography. So what that means by asymmetric means that it's not the same in both directions. Okay. So that means basically you have one key that you use to encrypt the data, and then you use a different key to decrypt the data. Okay. And this is how things like SSL and GPG and a lot of the things on the internet work.
And a lot of the Microsoft Active Directory infrastructure uses it too.
Yes, exactly. And so, for example, with SSL, the public key, right? So there's 2 keys, one to encrypt and one to decrypt. The one that allows you to encrypt is called the public key, and the one that lets you decrypt is the private key. Public means you publish it to everybody so that they can send you an encrypted message, and the private key you have to keep secret, so because that is what you use to read the encrypted message. Sure. Right? So with an SSL website, the public key is published as part of the certificate, and that means anybody can now send an encrypted message to that website. Right. and that's how they negotiate. Now, this type of asymmetric encryption is slow and expensive. So what we normally do with something like SSL is we use it to exchange the randomly generated password we're going to use for regular symmetric encryption for something like AES to actually encrypt all the data.
Okay.
So like, it's just used at the negotiation phase, basically.
Okay, I understand.
So I use the really complicated encryption to send you the password for the regular encryption.
Like, for example, I'm over right now at twitter.com, which is using HTTPS, and I'm looking at their information that they've published about their certificate. So in here, I see that they have their public key ID just pasted right here. I could just copy and paste that.
Yeah, and it's public and it's supposed to be.
Right.
And so basically,
that's how it works.
When you go to have an SSL conversation with them, you basically come up with a random number, encrypt it to them with that key, and then now you both know the secret for your regular encryption, but anyone eavesdropping in the middle couldn't see it because it was encrypted by the public-private key set.
Right.
Anyway, so the way that you come up with one of those key sets is basically whoever's coming up with the key, so this would be Twitter in this case, uses the RSA algorithm. And what they do is they pick two very large prime numbers randomly. The really important part here is that they choose random prime numbers.
Okay. How random can they be, though? Well, I guess that's a whole other topic. I won't get into that.
But basically, you want them to be as random as possible.
Okay.
And they need to be not too close together. But that's, again, beyond the scope here. So basically, they take these two really large prime numbers, and you multiply them together. And you keep that number. And that number is called the modulus. And that's used in both the public and private key pairs. Now, the idea here is that it's hard to do factoring to get back to find out what those secret two prime numbers you just came up with are.
Okay.
And so if someone ever figures out a way to do that, it breaks the whole system, but nobody has, and we don't think anybody will. So anyway, then you choose a public exponent. So this is the number that you're going to use. It's also published in the certificate. Now, there's an algorithm to come up with them, but we've found that if you just use the number 65537, it is strong enough, but still makes the encryption really fast. And so that's what we use pretty much for everything. But
okay.
So that's the public exponent. So you have the modulus, which is we'll call n, which is the two prime numbers multiplied together, and then the public exponent, or e, which is just this number that we've decided on. And then you have to calculate the private exponent. And that is a really complicated formula, but basically it's the public exponent modulus from Euler's totential of the modulus. And anyway, it's in the show notes if you actually want to see. But basically, that gives you the private exponent, which you obviously keep secret.
Yeah, okay.
So then to encrypt a message, an encrypted message being called C, you would take your plaintext message, and then what you do is you take the plaintext message and raise that to the power of the public exponent. In this case, 65537. Right? Then you modulus that by n, or the modulus, right? This number that we came up with by multiplying the two prime numbers together.
Okay. Are you doing the math right now? Is that what I hear on your keyboard?
Yeah, so I was fixing a problem in the note.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, so the encrypted message is the plaintext message to the power of the public exponent's modulus, which means divide and calculate the remainder of the modulus, the number which is the two primes multiplied together.
Okay.
So that gives you the encrypted message, which you can then send to somebody. Then that person receives that. They take the encrypted message and raise that to the power of the private exponent rather than the public one, which only the person who's allowed to decrypt the message should have, right? Then modulus that by that same modulus, right? Again, the two primes multiplied together.
Wow.
And that will give back the original message. So if you take the message and raise it to the public exponent and divide it by the modulus, you get the encrypted message. And if you take the encrypted message, raise it to the exponent of the private modulus or private exponent, and then modulus it by the modulus, you get the original message back.
Okay.
So that's how encryption works.
All right.
And like on Wikipedia, they have some examples with nice small numbers that you can actually follow the math.
Okay.
So it's actually relatively simple, right? You only have 3 variables and you're just doing an exponent and a modulus. There's no complicated math really. It all just relies on using these big, long, strong prime numbers. So what you have to remember though is the scale of the numbers you're going to be using, right? So most SSL certificates now, like the ones you would find at your bank or Amazon or Twitter, are 2048-bit RSA keys, right? So that means that modulus number, the multiplication of the 2 primes, is going to be on the order of 2 to the power of 248.
Okay.
Right? That's how long it's going to be.
Okay.
So basically what that means is that each of the 2 prime numbers is about 300 digits long. And then you multiply them together.
Okay. That's pretty big numbers we're talking here.
Yes. Yes. So, the number is 300 numbers long, and then there's 2 of them, and they're random, and they're prime, and you're multiplying them together. And so that's what it's
I say to the audience, stick with us. He's building to something here. He's building to something. I can feel it.
Yeah. So basically, these researchers did some work, and they used the databases from that EFF SSL observatory that we talked about way back.
Yeah.
And a bunch of other stuff. And they started examining what some of those modulus numbers were, right? Because they're published as part of the certificate.
Okay, yeah. So they've got a whole list of them there.
Yeah, and basically they found that some of them were the same. So there's out there somewhere, there's 2 people that happen to have guessed the same 2 random numbers.
So they have the same public keys? Is that what you're saying? They
Almost.
have this.
Yeah.
Okay.
So meaning their private keys would decrypt each other's messages.
That seems really bad, Alan. Is that actually possible?
Yeah. No, of course, there were like only a few thousand of those out of the 11.4 million. But that's not the big concern. The big concern was more, there are some where the number is too small and it's possible to figure out what the prime numbers were and get that private key.
Wow.
So basically, where there's keys out there on the internet where they provide absolutely no security, even though people think they do.
Wow.
Some of the problem with the data they were using, though, is the data includes everything they could find on the internet. So there's a lot of expired certificates or like PGP certificates from like 10 years ago that are just never used anymore.
Yeah.
So the number of that, 2 out of every 1,000 certificates is scarier than it actually is. But if you're interested in how the research worked and what the actual problems with it were, I have a link to the actual PDF file of the research.
Oh, cool.
It's quite in depth with graphs and everything. But basically, overall, the keys that they found that were compromisable appear, a lot of them were old and they did have some interesting numbers on the algorithms people use for SSL. For SSL, it's like 99.9% RSA. But a good chunk of them now are using at least SSA1, but more often SSA256. And, they're doing good security, although there are quite a few certificates that still use MD5 and not a strong enough bit length. But those are probably all those expired ones.
Wow, this is a great research paper. Oh, Alan, I love it when you link to the research papers.
Yeah. Now, although some other security researchers, including Dan Kaminsky, which I think was the guy that did the DNS thing a couple of years ago, but anyway, he's a prominent security researcher. He has posted a rebuttal on his blog about he says the research and their study is very good, but their conclusion isn't supported by the facts that they found. Basically, the conclusion of the research is that systems like RSA, where you have 2 secret numbers, right, the 2 prime numbers, aren't as secure as other systems like the Diffie-Hellman algorithm, which only use 1 secret number. So basically, the research is trying to say that systems that use the 2 secrets aren't as good as systems that use only 1 secret. And Dan Kaminsky says, your evidence doesn't actually back that up.
Yeah.
It's like, so you found a problem with the way RSA does something, but it doesn't mean that the other algorithms do it any better, or that, it doesn't support their conclusion.
Right. Huh.
Like correlation does not mean causation, right?
So right now, is this So this, I guess I'm a little mixed on where we stand on this. It does seem like an issue, but maybe not as bad.
It's a very small one, but yeah, basically, if you happen to be one of the people that has one of these really weak keys, then you should probably replace it, but you probably don't know that you have it. Part of the so the researchers didn't want to give out too much information because, as they said in the paper, if you duplicate this research, there are a certain number of people whose encrypted stuff you could read. So they didn't want to publish that without telling the people that were compromised first. But because they just using databases of SSL certificates found by the EFF and such, they didn't do their own scans of the internet. They don't know whose certificate belongs to who and so on.
Huh.
Also, some of the cases where they found the two people using the same key thing, it was because it was the same person that like reissued themselves a second certificate and so on. So, you know, it was legitimate that they were using the same data, right? Because they just reissued the actual certificate to have, for example, a different host name or an additional host name on it, and use the same key, which is acceptable. But sometimes it was hard for them to tell whether two certificates were actually related or not. And then the other thing is they included self-signed certificates. And, you know, people that are signing their own certificates and just using them internally aren't always doing it properly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
and so, you know, some of their numbers are off a little bit because their data includes good data and bad data, basically.
Yeah, I mean,
good examples and bad examples of the implementation of the technology.
This is, you know, the fundamental security of SSL is so important. This is one of those topics they'll just kick around for a long time until they've whittled it down to everybody's at least compromising on the way it was done.
We talked about recently the certificate authorities getting together and coming up with a newer set of standards that enforces a lot of these changes, and, you know, making sure that keys are at least this big,
right,
and making sure people didn't use the key generated with the Debian OpenSSL flaw,
right,
where the keys were, you know, trivially breakable.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's that story.
Yeah, great links in the show notes along with the SSL explanation that Alan gave. Any other thoughts on that story?
No, I think that's about it for that one.
So now this next story is about a company that was sort of like WikiLeaks
Not a
before.
Company, but
an organization of like scholars, I guess. It's like WikiLeaks before WikiLeaks was a thing. They've been around since like the late 90s. And
like 96 even. And yeah, they're basically the respectable original version of WikiLeaks.
Yeah, and it's like Cryptome, I think, is that Cryptome?
Just Cryptome.
Cryptome? Oh, Cryptome, okay. I never actually had to pronounce it out loud.
A really big book or whatever is like a tome. Right?
Yeah, okay. That's actually, I thought that, but I thought, no, maybe they're trying to be cute, you know, because I never actually had to say it out loud. Anyways, they were hit by what looks like a pretty interesting malware attack. And
yes and no. Basically, it looks like a really standard malware attack.
Well, interesting in the sense that it hit them, I think.
Yes.
Maybe it was targeted is kind of what I was kind of inferring, but I'll let you go.
Possibly, it's hard to say.
Yeah, of course, as always.
So Cryptome is a popular and long-standing document repository where whistleblowers and people interested in security and so on post information, and mostly documents. So from their website, they describe themselves as Cryptome welcomes documents for publications that are prohibited by government webs worldwide, in particular materials about freedom of expression, privacy, cryptology, dual-use technologies, meaning technologies that are used for military and civilian purposes, national security, intelligence, secret governance, open, secret, and classified documents, and so on and so on.
Yeah, you can tell they're hardcore because their website's really hardcore. It looks like it was made in '96.
Yeah, well, it's literally just a list of links to documents.
It's awesome.
That they host. Now, they say that documents will be removed from the site only under direct order from a U.S. court that has jurisdiction to do so, and no court order has ever been served, and they've been running since '96. And if they were served with such a document, they would publish the court document, and if they were gagged, they would find some way to publish it somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Right? So they wouldn't actually be gagged. And they say if people bluff and try to get stuff taken down, like sometimes happens, if those are comical in some way, they will post them. Kind of like, if you remember, like Pirate Bay used to
Pirate Bay
have
does that,
lots of fun doing that. Every time they get a takedown notice, especially the fraudulent ones.
Yeah.
Anyway, on sometime around February 8th, an attacker managed to upload some PHP code into their site. and modify. Basically, their site is actually made up of static HTML files.
Yeah, I noticed.
One for each post. Well, it scales better that way.
Oh, no, I'm not knocking it.
It's actually more secure that way.
Hell, man, if I could do it and not turn away viewers, I'd do it like that.
Yeah.
I'm not knocking it.
Right. Now, but it seems that on their server, they don't have PHP disabled or anything, although they probably use it for some stuff, but they might have been able to avoid some of this if they didn't serve anything except for static HTML files.
Yeah.
Right? If you don't need to serve anything other than static HTML,
run Nginx.
Well, yes, but disable PHP then, right? Yeah. So basically, the attacker uploaded some PHP and modified all the static HTML files so that they included a script tag that pointed to the PHP file, which was, in this case, hosted at Cryptome. And then that PHP file would put in some JavaScript that would inject an iframe that loads an external website. But it would only do that if your IP address wasn't in a range that belonged to Google or a list of other web scanners that might block the website as being malicious.
That's actually kind of clever.
Yeah.
Because that is actually a big problem.
And then they also only targeted people running Internet Explorer.
Also pretty clever, really.
Basically, the website it pointed you to exploited a vulnerability in IE to install some malware on your computer. So it didn't bother trying to do it if you were running Firefox or Chrome or whatever. But this also meant that, the people that run the site or even just other power users that are using Firefox never noticed what was happening because it didn't happen for them. It only happened for people running IE. But anyway, a user contacted the site saying that he got a big security warning from Symantec, saying that it detected this black hole exploit kit being run on the website. And they sent that into the site administrator, and he noticed that his files had been modified and that it was doing this and started the process of cleaning it up. So he was notified on February 12th that it had happened, and by February 14th, he had restored all the files from backups so that they hadn't been modified to include the malicious code. Okay. He also, on the Cryptome website, in a post about the compromise, he includes the source code of the PHP if you want to look at it and see how it works, and a bunch of people sending analysis on it. But we also link to a really good analysis blog in the show notes here. And it basically covers what the malware did and so on. It's not known yet what vector the malware used to get into the site to be able to, to write a file and modify all the HTML files. Because apparently it also managed to do it in such a way that the modified date on the directory the files were in wasn't updated. So the modified time on the files was, but the directory wasn't. So that depends on which way you do it. But basically, if you use something like rsync, it usually creates a temporary file, copies it, and then swaps it in place of the original file. So that modifies the directory because you created a file and removed a file. Whereas if you edit it in place, it doesn't update the directory.
Yeah. So yeah, they're just all the little tricks,
A bunch of stuff. Also, Symantec has extended an offer to Cryptome to help them investigate the attack to figure out how they broke into the site. Because Symantec and a bunch of other security companies have found that this black hole exploit kit is used in a large percentage of all the malware infections on websites, right? Like they target a lot of other websites. And so basically it seems that it's just a common exploit where it knows some vulnerability in some software running on the server somewhere and then uses that to infect the websites. Interestingly, it seemed that Cryptome had WebDAV and front page running. Which is common when you install something like cPanel.
Yeah,
it does it all for you.
That's what happened.
Yeah. So it's not clear exactly what vector, but there might have been a few.
Oh, jeez.
But the same thing happens to people's WordPress blogs all the time.
Oh yeah, no. And the problem is a lot of these things just have too much stuff on by default.
Yeah. Is WordPress, you don't keep it updated. They find the exploit, and then a lot of these malware things, they're not specifically targeting your website. They're Googling for every website that's running version X.Y of, WordPress or whatever software.
Mm-hmm.
And when they find that, they're able to exploit WordPress and then, depending on what permissions WordPress has, be able to affect other files.
Right.
So in most cases, since people install they give WordPress permissions to the template directory so they can install new templates, WordPress can then modify the template to include the iframe that points to the malicious site.
I wonder if people would be interested in us ever doing an episode on our suggestions for securing a WordPress setup. Like if you want to take from scratch and set up a WordPress installation and make it secure, at least with our recommendations. People would
although some of those depend on your control of the web
We'd have to recommend like probably the software, the lower software stack, and then also like make sure you're root and things like that, so you can do some of these things.
Well, some of the other thing is like for WordPress, if your PHP code executes as a user like www or something, then you can control the access. But it also means that one user does the stuff. So if you have multiple sites, it's harder to isolate them if your web server runs as just a www user or an unprivileged user.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of sites like popular like web hosts will use something like SuPHP, where each customer's code runs as their own user.
Right.
Which is good, except that makes it harder for that user to control what they can do versus what the site can do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? You only want WordPress to be able to write to like this one directory for file uploads, and you don't want WordPress to be able to modify itself. Of course, when you take away WordPress's ability to modify itself, you can't do the easy update. You have to do the manual update.
And WordPress puts out so many updates so frequently that's a pretty big hindrance. I mean, like it's a task to stay on top of the WordPress updates when you run a large site.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a catch-22 for sure. And I guess if a person wanted to, they could sit down and come up with scripts where they ran a script to secure it and they ran another script to change the rights back before they did the update and then change them back. What would be kind of nice is if maybe WordPress, as long as it didn't get exploited, could offer some sort of pre and post installation scripts where they could do that for you.
Possibly.
Something like that.
But again, that wouldn't work because they would execute as a WordPress user.
Yeah, that's right, huh? Yeah, you'd have,
And so at Scale Engine, we use a hybrid approach where we have the PHP code for Jupyter Broadcasting doesn't run as the Jupyter Broadcasting user. It runs as a special PHP Jupyter Broadcasting user.
Right.
So that user, we can control its permissions very specifically.
And is he a member of is that user in a member of an overall Jupyter Broadcasting group?
Right. So basically you own the files as Jupyter Broadcasting, and then by setting the permissions on the files to whether or not group has read or write access, you control whether the web server user for your site can control it.
I like that.
Whereas if you do just the single www user or nobody or Apache user, which is standard on when you install the package with Ubuntu or whatever,
and pretty much all Linux distros.
Then if you allow the www user to write, that means the www user for somebody else's site could possibly write to you. Yeah. And it makes the permissions get really complicated.
Yeah.
But doing a setup where there's a separate user for each website is really complicated. But with Scale Engine, because we're hosting fewer very large sites instead of thousands of very tiny sites, it works for us.
It's a different structure.
It's worth the overhead, basically. Yep. Whereas a lot of times it's not.
Alan, the fact of the matter is hosting is a complicated business. You know what I'm saying? And that is why I recommend people check out GoDaddy.com, because they handle the hosting for you. And we've got a deal for the month of February. If you use the code HOSTFEB8, you can get their deluxe hosting package for the price of the economy hosting package, which is awesome because then it's just click, set, and you don't have to worry about it. Don't even give it another thought. They just run with unlimited bandwidth, 150 gigs of space, and 500 email accounts, 25 MySQL databases, all for the price of their economy hosting. And also, GoDaddy also offers SSL certificates, and this is one of these areas where I recommend you go with an industry-trusted standard, because A, they've got the weight to make the changes they need if something comes up, and B, they are working on this like nobody else because this is their core business. So also check out their different SSL packages. And just a reminder that when you're over at GoDaddy.com, you can check out with our code TechSNAP10 to save 10%. Or if you want to use the code TechSNAP7, this is only a limited time offer too. TechSNAP7 will get you a .com for $7.99. That's not bad.
Instead of in your regular price, it's like $11.99 or something. So
and we also have a special for .co's, which is the new hot domain that they're trying to get all the businesses to get over to, because I think you'll start to see those get snapped up pretty quick. So you can go get a special offer code. Yeah, go get a special offer code for .co over in the show notes for TechSNAP. Alan, before we move on, did you have any other thoughts on that story?
No, I just in the show notes I linked to detailed analysis by a couple by cyberwar.nl, Security Week's coverage of what actually happened, and the official announcement at Cryptome, which includes the source code for the PHP and all the other stuff.
That is rocking and rolling. Yeah. Also, great details in the show notes for all that stuff.
Yep.
All right, Alan. Well, you know what that means. It's time for the TechSNAP feedback. And welcome to the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your questions or your war stories to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com or submitting them to our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. Now, this week we're doing a war story, Alan, and it's from the other Alan again.
Yes.
I realized after going through this that he has a whole stash. He must have lived like 5 times in the 5 lifetimes in this IBM call center, because these just give me gray hair hearing them sometimes.
Yeah.
So, all right.
So yes, we have yet another story from the series that he sent us. And this one happens to be about his very first day.
Oh, boy.
Yes.
How bad could that be? The first day, right? How bad could that be?
It's usually the worst.
Yeah. So true. All right, so what happened? And I'll just be providing color commentary this week. I don't have a role.
There's no conversation in this one.
No.
So he joined IBM in February of 1999 as tech support agent for US ThinkPad support. The training regime back then was about 7 weeks long. And the final 5 weeks, each were dedicated to hands-on experience with different product lines, laptops and the different versions and desktops and so on. So the call center had 2 support sections: the Aptiva, which is IBM desktops for home users, and ThinkPads, which are laptops for business and home users.
Yeah.
The most technical staff from Aptiva were usually moved over to ThinkPad support, because that's their flagship, right?
Yeah, you could always sense it too when you call in for home support. Yes. You get the bottom rung dudes.
Yeah, and it's if you're good at home support, you get promoted to business support.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, those guys pay more.
So major training during major emphasis during the training for ThinkPad support was on trying to avoid resorting to reloading the OS, right? Because you lose people's files and people just whine. And also, nobody likes to call tech support and just be told to reload the machine every time, right?
Right. Totally.
Yeah. So they had solid emphasis on problem-solving techniques and constantly trying to isolate the problem and solve it rather than just reload.
That's good, actually.
The only caveat to their training was that if a support call went on for more than an hour, then ask your team leader and promote it to second level support and let somebody else handle it rather than just going on forever, right?
Yeah.
Because, after an hour, sometimes just fresh eyes makes a difference.
Getting sometimes getting away from it, you can come back to it later too.
Yeah. You promote it to second level and they have more experience with the more difficult stuff. So you got the distinct impression that by giving up and promoting it, escalating it to second level support was basically an admission of defeat. And if he's anything like me, nobody wants to admit defeat.
So true.
And the only exception was passing your case over to second level support was if there's some procedure or fix that required advanced skills or registry changes, right? Because nobody wants the junior guy walking somebody through changing the registry on a Windows 95 machine. All right. So his very first shift, he starts at 4:30 in the afternoon and goes till 1:30 at night, Monday to Friday, because you're supporting U.S. users, so that's their 9 to 5 kind of thing.
Right. Yep.
And because he's in Ireland, the time shifted.
It's rough.
Yeah. So for the first few hours on the floor, he does call shadowing, right? Listening into other tech support calls to see how other people do it. And it gets you a feel for how the calls work and everything. So immediately prior to joining IBM, he had run his own computer store, or a little shop where he repaired stuff.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's adorable.
But apparently his partner swindled funds from the company and he shut it down and went back to doing freelance.
Oh, that's not adorable at all.
Yeah, that's not fun.
No.
But when he got the I'm pregnant revelation from his girlfriend, he decided that a steady paycheck from IBM was probably the better option.
Yeah, funny how that tends to make that realization click quite often for most guys.
Yes. It gave me a bit of an ego when it comes to mere tech support calls, right? Because he had run a shop and done everything himself. And his level of experience is probably higher than what a lot of the time the other people in the tech support have. But at the same time, like he says, that can come to bite you because you're so used to the problems being complicated that you forget to check the simple things first.
That
right?
definitely happens to me. That actually, when I worked a long time as a server admin and then had to start doing desktop support as part of being a contractor, it took me a little while actually to start thinking of check the Cat5 cable and stuff like that.
Yeah, I remember in high school, so probably a little bit later than this 1999 incident, but our math teacher was complaining about the problem she was having, and a friend of mine, Wes, who was also into computers, was, oh, your power supplies failed and this and that and the other thing. And I'm like, check the power cable. It probably looks like it's in, but it might be like half in. So take it all the way out and plug it all the way back in, and then fixed it.
It's such a problem, actually.
Well, especially when the cable's it's not completely out, so it looks like
it. Yeah, well, when I worked for a school district for a while, and when they would be hiring somebody, this is actually a great interviewing trick for you guys out there. If they were hiring somebody whose resume was really just like way outside of what they needed, but they wanted to bring them in to see what they had to offer, they would try making them do some simple troubleshooting and PC fixing techniques. And one of the tests they would do is they would take the the little switch on the back of a power supply that changes it from 120 volts to 220. They'd flip that switch, and they'd tell the guy, the PC's not booting, and we're not quite sure why. And then they would see if he would try out some of the basics like that, because sometimes the server guys, they don't really bring it all the way down, and that was sort of their test.
That's one I probably wouldn't remember to check.
I know.
I checked the regular power switch on the back.
Yeah. That's why I'm sharing this with people, because if it ever happens to you, now you can check. Because can you imagine how embarrassed you would be if you found out that's what it was? In fact, one of the guys was a buddy of mine, and I did eventually tell him, and he's like, "Oh my gosh."
I remember an episode of the Screensavers back on Tech TV when that used to be a TV channel.
Yeah.
And they had a race between two teams to build a computer from scratch as fast as possible.
I remember that was fun.
Yeah, and I think it was Patrick Norton's team forgot the P4 power connector, and so it wouldn't boot. Because that was a new thing at the time.
Right. Yeah. That's fun. I like that. All right. Well, so war story continues.
So he finished up his call shadowing and went to his own desk, and he set up his applications for creating the tickets and so on. To give you a reference of what era of computers this was, he was running a Pentium 166 megahertz running OS2 Warp 4. Right? He's not even using Windows at this point.
Oh boy, old school. Man, he's dating himself here.
Yeah. So once he settled in and hit the available button on his phone, a couple minutes later, the phone rings and he's on his first call.
Yeah.
So he gives the scripted greeting. Thank you for calling IBM PC Help Center. My name is Alan with ThinkPad Support. How can I help you? Then you let the user give the opening details, capture all the relevant information, ask what type of computer it is, get the serial number, asset tags, make sure it's under warranty, and all that, so on.
Yeah, sure.
The user had just bought a 3Com PC MCIA network card.
Oh boy.
Right? Because back then computers didn't always come with a network card.
And those things were such a beast to get working in those older OSs. I hated that stuff.
Yeah, especially like Windows 95.
Oh, the worst.
Yeah. So the ThinkPad wouldn't detect it properly.
Surprise.
Windows 95 preloaded on the laptop, and the user seemed savvy enough to have installed the drivers from the CD that would have came with the PC MCIA card and so on. Nonetheless, because it's troubleshooting, what you do is you walk through the entire process again and make sure.
But you remember Windows 95 was when they rolled out plug and play, and that was the part that demo failed.
Work.
Right. Do you remember that was the part when Bill Gates was demoing Windows 95 on stage? He was demoing plug and play, and he plugged something in, and it blue screened on stage. I mean, yeah. So, anyways, continue on, sir.
Yeah. So then he went into the device manager to make sure, everything else.
Yeah. He's doing all of this over the phone, so he has to walk them through it.
But also, he's being a little ostentatious and making sure that all the other agents around him can hear how bossy he is handling this call. Right? He's like getting into the nitty gritty and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So once there, I asked if he could see an entry for the card, for the PCMCIA card.
In device manager, sure.
Yeah. And he said that he did. All right. So it's detecting the card. And if it has the name in Windows 95, it probably has the driver.
Yeah.
But as expected, it has an exclamation mark beside it. Right? Because every time there was a problem with the device, it would put this little yellow circle with an exclamation mark.
Yeah.
So straight away, his head started to jump through all the possible problems it could be. Memory address conflict or IRQ conflict.
Oh, IRQs. Right. Remember I used to worry about IRQs back in the day?
Yes. Yeah. I remember having to set them with jumpers on my sound card.
Yes. And some sound cards would only come with a certain set of IRQs you could preset with. So you'd have to maybe sometimes move another device, which also only had a certain set of ranges you could set.
Yep. And then, so I had that and a modem that did that. So I had the SCSI card for my hard drive and my tape drive and my CD-ROM. Yeah. Then the sound card and then the modem that all had to have different IRQs.
Totally. Same setup. Setup. It's funny.
So he starts jumping through all those things in his head. You know, and the other thing is that it might even just be an update for the operating system, although back then something like Windows Update was still kind of a pipe dream.
Mm-hmm.
Most people didn't even have the internet, and but you know, PCI MCI is kind of new, and it's a network card.
And also, to make this worse, is you couldn't like Google 3Com PCI MCA card Windows 95 not detected because there wasn't a Google.
Right.
So you were, you know, there's not like a.
I think that
Alta Vista maybe.
There would have been a Google, but it was at a university and nobody had heard of it yet.
Right, yeah. But you know what I mean? Like, and there wasn't like a vast repository of information for troubleshooting. Yep. Dude, I remember when you first started seeing other people report issues and troubleshoot stuff online, and what a watershed moment that was. It was huge. Yep. And so, yeah. I guess maybe back then you had the very beginnings. It was ask.com and stuff.
Maybe, but basically IBM had their internal knowledge base.
Oh, yeah. That's what people would do is they'd build internal knowledge bases all the time. Yeah.
And you know, that keeping that stuff was kind of gravy for them, right? It meant they could solve the problem really quick and nobody else could. So they didn't post that online. They kept that.
Right.
So he reckoned it was an IRQ conflict was the most likely starting point. So he asked him to go into the IRQ tab in Device Manager and see what he said was there. But as he described the device tree to me, I get this sinking feeling. The one, you know, the next thing is, you know, it's going to complete total. Yeah. So basically, he's been showing off, and now it's going to come back to bite him.
Right.
So he's, you know, going to look like a complete and total tit in front of all of his colleagues, because the problem is that every single hardware entry in the IRQ list shows the status in use by an unknown device. So every single IRQ is in use by some unknown device, and the PCMCII card can't get an IRQ.
Right. Oh my god.
There's only one explanation for that. It means there's a corrupted registry. So there's two choices. Number one was to have the user do a user.da0 and system.da0 restore, right? Put back the default hives that come in when you first install Windows.
Lose a bunch of their settings.
Yeah, so it's almost a reload, basically.
Yeah.
Or number two is just to do a reload, which doesn't require the user to go into DOS, which is probably going to save a lot of time and headache. So number one was not something that IBM wanted agents to do, right? That was something you promote to second level support to explain how to do that. So it turned out that the second level support guy for the floor was walking around, and he was near Irish's seat, and he had heard everything going on, including Irish showing off and then turning red. So he's swaying over to
Poor
Irish with an evil smirk and told him to do the system reload. So my first call turned into the one solution that we were absolutely not supposed to resort to.
Oh, man.
And cap it all off, the second level support guy finishes with, I'm keeping an eye on you, Elliot. Like, close eye.
Keeping an eye on you, noob.
And so at that point, the only phrase going through Irish's head is bullocks drink expletive, arse expletive.
Right.
So on, so on. And so that was the beginning of his tech support career.
Man, oh man. Boy, I don't miss those days. You know, the Irish is in the chat room right now, and he says we also had TechNet. And I think my company paid several $100s a year to get these massive binders from Microsoft that just had CDs full of crap that they paid people to write, and they were just so much waste. And now it's all just online. It's pretty crazy. You can still get that, but
I remember the shelves full of manuals and like incident reports and stuff when I worked at the power plant. They had just had, you know, these giant encyclopedia volumes basically that had, you know, one time this happened to somebody and this is how they fixed it.
Right.
And it's like, without a searchable index, it was pretty much impossible to find something in there anyway.
Gosh, those are the tech support dark ages. Well, thanks to Alan, the other Alan, for sending that in. That was a great story. Had kind of a rocky start, but, you know, I mean, hell, it worked out for him. And then, of course, he went on to have a bunch of more war stories, which I'm sure we'll have another one on the show soon. So, all right. Well, all right. Should we move on to the roundup, Al?
Yes.
Okay, everybody, get your funky music ready, because it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. And it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that were pretty much exclusively pulled from our TechSNAP subreddit page and are either stories that we didn't promote up to the main section of the show, or they're just links that we think you could follow up on and check on your own if you're interested. And we kind of run through them at a quicker pace than the rest of the show. All right, Alan, are you ready for the first story in the Roundup this week?
Yes.
All right, and that is yours. Microsoft antivirus briefly flags Google.com as malicious.
Yes. So Microsoft issued an update for their antivirus thing on Valentine's Day, and it flagged Google as being malicious.
Happy Valentine's Day, Google.
Yeah.
This is Security Essentials, huh? And Forefront. Microsoft Security Essentials and Forefront, which can affect you at a corporate level, said that they had an exploit of JS balco.bw on their site. The black hole.
Obviously did.
Yeah, that's too funny. Huh. Well, I'm sure they issued a quick fix for that. Hasn't that happened before? Didn't they flag Firefox at one point?
I think so, yes.
This one came across my radar just because it kind of fits in with some of the topics we've covered on TechSNAP before. I don't have a lot to say, but it's called cloudcracker.com, and it is a cloud-hosted WPA cracking service. WPA or LM and NTLM, and you submit the handshake file and the ESSID, and then they submit it off, and in about 20 minutes for about $17, they hack the WPA password.
Yeah, so basically they're probably just reselling Amazon's cluster or something to that effect.
Oh, yeah, totally.
You know, people that used to do Bitcoin that have the machines with the video cards and all set up, there may be a market to sell those resources to companies that are looking for that kind of thing, right? If you're willing to sell it for less an hour than Amazon does, and also your ATI cards are probably going to work better than the Amazons, which are based on the Fermi cards.
Right.
Which is why nobody used Amazon for Bitcoin.
Yeah, I looked into that, and it just did not make sense.
Well, yeah, once the difficulty went up, it didn't make sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, so if you have a bunch of these Bitcoin boxes, probably, or just the video cards or whatever, you may be able to.
Yeah.
There may be a market to hashing passwords instead of generating Bitcoins.
That's surplus hardware you could make some money with. All right. Well, the next story on the roundup is about NASDAQ and BATS websites getting DDoSed a little bit here. Just a little DDoS, Alan.
Right. And now, when the news covers the NASDAQ being attacked by a denial of service attack, everybody's like, oh no, the financial markets, whatever.
Yeah,
it was only their website. It didn't affect trading in any way. But, it's a denial of service attack. It happens.
Yeah.
But it's important to distinguish when it actually affects stock trading and when it doesn't. In this case, it didn't.
Right. Just a little website outage. Now, this next story is sort of the next step in what seems to be an overall story we've been covering since around when TechSNAP started regarding Iran and their approach towards the internet. And about 2 months ago, they came out and made this big stink saying Iran is close to having this firewall, and we're going to be able to cut ourselves off if we want. Well, if you've been following the news, that actually did happen recently. Iran did shut down different parts of the internet, access to different parts of the internet. And in fact, it's still going on in some capacities. What's interesting, though, and this is the story in the roundup, it comes from Ars Technica, is Tor users are all back online. They were hit too at first, but the network actually pretty quickly responded. And
Well, it's just a matter of having nodes that can be reached from the parts of the internet Iran does still allow.
When the crackdown first started, they went from 50,000 active Tor nodes over in Iran to 0, and now they're back up to that number range again. So,
all you need is a couple of nodes between Iran and so basically it's a Venn diagram, right? You have the part of the internet Iran can get to, and then the rest of the internet.
Right.
And you just need something that bridges the two.
Right. And that's what's awesome about Tor.
Yeah. As long as there's a couple of nodes that have enough bandwidth and can get between Iran and the rest of the internet, then Iran could stay on the internet.
Yay for Tor enabling Twitter. Now, the next story is an Iran follow-up. It's just about Stuxnet, because it does come up a lot on this show. Experts over in Iran say that they have finally neutralized the Stuxnet virus. That's really all I had to add to it.
So they managed to get it off of their hardware.
Yeah, or remove, actually, in some cases, hardware that was infected. They just kind of failed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yes, because some of the, I think we discussed a little bit how one part of the Stuxnet was actually reprogramming the
firmware
logic. Yeah, the firmware on the centrifuges. And so the only way to solve that is to get rid of it, really.
All right, now this next story is pretty interesting. It's coming out of Nortel, and Nortel is a major player in the telecommunications. Well, they used to be.
It used to be.
Yeah.
It was a big Canadian company that's basically been auctioned off into little pieces anyway.
I used to work with a coworker who swore by Nortel, but this is a little bad news, isn't it?
They used to make, they were kind of like competitor to Cisco. They would make like big switches and stuff.
Yeah, and they had a phone
system. Not so
system.
much routers, but yeah, phone systems and so on. Yeah, that's where the name comes from. It was like Northern Telecom. It was a Canadian company.
So now it's coming out that Chinese hackers had basically unrestricted access for quite a while to Nortel's network.
Yeah, it's apparently for almost an entire 10-year period.
That is
so they managed to basically compromise some set of credentials that apparently never changed. Or in some way, they managed to break into the network and be undetected and just continue to have access to the information.
Wow. And again, it's linked back to China.
Yeah. Now, none of it ever says whether they managed to actually compromise anything important, but they had access to some stuff in the Nortel network anyway for an entire decade.
Amazing from a networking hardware vendor that happened.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the next story on the roundup is also like Microsoft knows better. How does this happen? The Microsoft store in India was hacked, and the passwords were stored in plain text.
Yeah. So they were storing all their users' passwords in plain text. So the people that broke into the Microsoft store have everybody's username and password.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, that's not of much use because they don't care about the Microsoft store. However, they probably also have somebody's email address. And how many people use the same password for everything? Quite a few.
Just about everybody, yeah.
And even if they don't, if they use the same password for their email, you break into their email, you can reset the rest of their passwords, and so on. And even if you don't, you break into a couple other services, you can learn enough about them, right? If they use the same password for Facebook, you get into somebody's Facebook, you can find out the answer to their secret question, right? What was their favorite teacher in grade school, or
right,
where were they born, or what's their mother's maiden name, and all that stuff.
It's pretty easy to start taking it back from there. I thought it was interesting too. It's a group calling themselves Evil Shadow Team. Mm-hmm. So there you go. I don't know if I would. The other reason I threw it in the roundup is because we've seen, like in the case of Sony, that sometimes they use similar software at all their different regional locations. So I was like, is it possible they're storing it in plain text at other Microsoft stores too?
Quite,
because it could be the same online software suite they're using for all the different stores, and they just rebrand it for the different country.
It makes a lot more sense to do it that way than to have something different for every country,
right? So I hope that's not the case, and if it is the case, I hope Microsoft is fixing it right now. All right. Well, the last story.
Also, I hope they fire whoever did that, because literally no sense.
Seriously. Well, so SKB in the chat room says that he was told a contractor set it up like that. It's always the contractor. All right, let's talk about the last story in the roundup.
That's what happens when you accept the lowest bid.
Yeah. Or he's also at least makes a good scapegoat. I know that one. The Bitcoin exchange Trade Hill, which is sort of like had been a well-revered Bitcoin exchange, is shutting down. Now, we've used to talk about Bitcoin quite a bit. We've pulled back just because we're kind of seeing where it goes, but unfortunately, due to a loss of their primary payment processor, Paxum, due to new regulations, so they say, they're shutting down, and they're refunding money.
Basically, Trade Hill was almost acting as a bank or other financial institution in this, and they weren't licensed by a government or whatever. And so the bank that they were dealing with was stopped dealing with them because of laws to tighten that up. And so they're shutting down apparently temporarily.
Yeah, that's the interesting part, right? Is they could come back as a different company or something like that, I guess.
Or basically, if they can manage to get the right licenses or whatever, then they could.
They're sending back all of their funds, or they're allowing people to donate it to Bitcoin development. It's interesting, though, to see this as to me, it seems like a bad indicator, since this is like the second largest Bitcoin exchange out there. To have them shut down like this, now that's not the only option. There's other options out there.
Yes,
besides MTGOX, but it just doesn't seem like a good thing.
There's also there's specific exchanges that only deal in Canada, and they've had to make quite a few changes to comply with Canadian laws as well. You can only do a few $100s through the exchange before you have to prove your identity and a couple other things. And they've transitioned what type of payments they accept and so on. But
prove your identity thing is interesting. I guess that's to track money laundering?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is required under Canadian law.
Right. Well, Alan, I think that brings us to the end of this week's TechSNAP, a slightly more compacted version based on the last two big boys we put out, but we thought we should counterbalance a little yin to that yang of hour and 30-minute shows.
Also, I just ran out of time writing show notes.
That too. That happens too sometimes.
I got reading that RSA thing, and I spent way too much time reading.
Well, hey, it was interesting.
That PDF is a good read.
It's interesting, and it's something that we're going to definitely have to keep watching because SSL is no small component on the internet. I mean, it's
but it's okay. Don't get afraid about it yet.
And go check the show notes if you need some of that stuff re-explained to you, because Alan broke it all out in the show notes there. All right, everyone. Well, just a reminder that TechSNAP is live Thursday afternoons over at jblive.tv at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is 4 p.m. Eastern.
Yep, and 2100 UTC.
Yeah, over at jblive.tv, or you can stream it. The audio version is jblive.am. Nice and easy to remember. And you can join our chat room and get your thoughts heard while we go. I'm always checking that chat room to see what you guys say and integrating your feedback into the show. Also, don't forget to email us, techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com, and check out that subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And say thanks to Good Old Games for sponsoring this week's episode of TechSNAP.
Yes.
GOG.com over on Twitter, and GOG.com is their website. Go check out those two titles I linked you to. They've got some amazingly fun gameplay in them, and they're super cheap, so they're totally worth it. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you right back here next week.